if I could get, yes, Pastor Tom, Pastor Michael, and Chris, if you are still, yes, Pastor Chris. I'll sit far over here on the far right, stage right, your left. All right, I'm going to start. These are just questions that I'm going to try to, and you guys will each have a mic here in a second. Thank you, James. Listened carefully. I'm going to try to represent our attendees as best I can. And Chris, this is an open-ended question, Pastor Chris, for you. Help us to not kill ourselves after your talk there.
Well, hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you go. You're on.
So I didn't get into God's sovereignty. So there is another side to the story, and I don't think you should kill yourself. So yeah.
Can I ask what can the machines not do?
Well, there are many things they are not capable of yet. So what we're dealing with is anticipated developments. So things may not work out the way all of the gurus who talk about tech think they will. So that's I think something that means that we should take everything they say with a grain of salt. But my comments about Chesterton's sort of lightheartedness about the future were intended to remind you that lightheartedness sometimes cannot be justified. In other words, what followed in the 20th century was nothing like anything that Chesterton could anticipate. Things can go really bad. And so it's helpful to think about worst case scenarios, not because you want to get depressed, but generally speaking, I think that one of the ways that you prepare yourself for bad times is to imagine yourself in bad times, and then doing the things that you need to do to prepare for that eventuality. That doesn't mean you get up every day and just think about terrible things, but it does mean that. So for I've been in it was. David's talk was really very good, and I've been through many episodes in my life where you kind of had to stand and deliver. But often it was because I had done a lot of prep that I was ready for that. So those are some things to think about.
That's helpful. Pastor Tom, you've been through a lot. You've seen a lot. You've been in the ministry for a lot longer than most of us in this room. How does this compare, this AI, social media, how does that compare to the technological stuff? How does that compare to other changes you've seen in the wider world during your ministry? Are you like, I've seen this before, I've seen when they say the world's going to end and it didn't end, or do you feel like this is different?
Well, I remember when they started making predictions about the printing press and what that would do. We lived through that. No, the internet. I remember, in fact, Founders Ministries had one of the first significant websites on the internet. And it was because of an engineering professor at Auburn University who liked Founders. He called me one day and he spent about 20 minutes convincing me we needed a website. And he said, I'll build it for you. Can I do that? And I said, well, yeah, I think that'd be a great idea. So I hung up my landline telephone and started calling everybody I knew and asking, what is a website?
Do you know now?
Yeah, I know now, some, but I don't know how to navigate all of it. Yeah, so the internet changed things. The internet just democratized information. And even what David was saying in his last talk about theological education, 30 years ago, you couldn't have anticipated that or said that. So I don't know. I'm very interested in what Pastor Wiley talked about in AI, and I've just read very little, tried to listen to people who've read more. And in some ways it's frightening. In other ways it's exciting. God is sovereign and God is ruling, and so not anything happens apart from his meticulous providential arrangement, and he has put us here now. And so I know definitely as Christians, we cannot give in to any kind of spirit of fear, but we need to be looking to what it is God intends to do in and through this era of history, just like he's been working from the very beginning. So there's reason for hope, but those reasons have nothing to do with AI. They have everything to do with what God's already revealed to us and given to us in his crucified and risen Son.
That's helpful. This sort of goes in with Chris's talk, but you've been involved in the SBC for a long time. You've seen a drift. You've fought against a drift. In your mind, are the threats that we're facing, is it mostly bad actors, people with malicious intent, or is it just ignorant people who don't know what they're really doing?
Yeah, I don't think those are mutually exclusive, and
dumb and evil people.
Yeah, dumb and evil. It's a the SBC is in the mess it's in because of failed leadership. I mean, if I had to say one thing, it would be failed leadership. And by that, I mean even men that I have known for decades and love and have appreciated many of the good things they've done. When the moment of crises came, they failed. They could have gone to a microphone and spoken and stopped a lot of the nonsense that we are now living with in the SBC, and they just refused to do it. I pled with more than a few of them privately, who have been very sympathetic privately, who publicly just simply refuse. I told one of the last ones I spoke to is a younger leader in the SBC, and I said, here's the kind of man we need. He said, I want to be that man. I want to be that man. I said, I think you can be that man, but you're going to have to break the 11th commandment. You're going to have to be willing to say some things that are critical, and you're going to have to be willing to not be liked. And that's the last conversation I've ever had with him. So failed leadership. Southern Baptists are big. 40-something thousand churches, and I know that a lot of our churches are filled with unregenerate people. So that being the case, Southern Baptists still, I believe, by and large, are salt of the earth people. I think if you go to the typical Southern Baptist church, you're going to find some real Christians there who love Jesus. They love the Word of God. They don't understand all of these things going on in the political world of the SBC. If they did understand it, they wouldn't stand for it. They just trust. They just trust the leadership, trust the way things have been going on for decades. And by God's grace, maybe they'll be awakened at some point and demand change. I think we're getting closer to that than we've ever been. Whether that'll happen or not, the Lord knows.
This is for any of you. 15 years ago, I think most of us trusted Russell Moore-ish. 10 years ago, David French-ish. How do we spot the next one? How do we spot the next person we thought was trustworthy, reliable, and not give them too much of our trust? And second question, how do we make sure we're not the next Russell Moore or David French?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. We just had some things stated by James K.A. Smith that surprised a number of people, and I've thought to myself, didn't you read anything he wrote? You shouldn't be surprised at all. But I do think that there is a kind of set of, well, there are circles that people circulate in that you're not privy to, and then you discover that maybe somebody that you've looked up to has been influenced in that circle in ways that you weren't aware was occurring, So there are, I think, mixed messages that we send to our leaders. We want them to be faithful, but we also want them to be connected. We want them to be influential. And often there is a kind of tacit exchange that occurs in order to obtain access to some perhaps publication or circle of people. So I'm in the PCA. Tim Keller, of course, is somebody that is often looked to as a model for having influence in a place like New York City. I have a very different opinion. I think New York City had a far greater influence on Tim Keller. Yeah. And I think that the reason why he was able to find a place in the New York Times or the Atlantic is because he might have rationalized that he was using them, but they were using him. So those sorts of exchanges occur. I don't know Russell Moore, but I know many people who do, and they tell me the same thing occurred there. I think the same thing can be assumed to be the case with David French. But I think that there's this desire that we have, and we laud and praise these people who become public figures, and we think, at last, we have our guy in Moscow or wherever. I mean Moscow meaning Russia, not Idaho. But I think that we ought to be very, I guess, circumspect and not necessarily cynical, but I do think we should be aware of the remarkable temptations these men are subject to in order to achieve some of their desired goals, and the kind of the hurdles they're told they need to leap over, the gauntlets, whatever, the institutions they need to be favored by, all those kinds of things, and what goes on kind of behind the scenes eventually does come out. This is why we now talk about these people this way. That wasn't the case, as you noted, 20, 15 years ago.
Michael, can you speak to, I know there was an article, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago that Russell Moore wrote about like patriarchy, right, that you really liked, and that now I would imagine he would like to not exist anymore. I mean, I don't want to speak for the man, but the way he conducts himself now, I would imagine he would not write that article or like that it exists. I guess I'm just sort of asking, how much does that de-evolution surprise you? How do we protect against it ourselves? Because we all want to sit at the cool kids table in our weaker moments. Can you speak to that?
So Russell Moore, he disavowed his own article explicitly. At least he wrote in the last year or two that I don't agree with the Russell Moore of back then. So if you don't know, he wrote this as. And it was kind of a landmark piece for me when I read it when I was in seminary, and it's called "After Patriarchy, what?" ? Google it, look it up. It's a banger. It's a great piece. But the Russell Moore who wrote it is not the Russell Moore that we have today, because he's abandoned those things. But I think for the reasons that Chris mentioned, there's a respectability. There's a negotiation that you have. It's like, I'll do this, you do that. And I don't think anybody, maybe even, certainly not, I don't think they would say it out loud, maybe not even consciously aware that there's this tacit compromise that we're both participating in, where I won't say the thing that you don't want me to say, and you won't say the thing that I don't want you to say, and then we can scratch each other's back, and we can climb each other's ladders up to whatever pinnacle we're trying to reach. That's what's happened to Russell Moore. And honestly, that terrifies me, because I don't want to be that. And I think that at the very least, we have to begin with saying, like, that can happen to anybody. Compromise can happen to anyone. If you read through Genesis, what you see happening is Lot was hanging with Abraham, and then he and Abraham split, and he's hanging out around Sodom, and then he's at the gates of Sodom. The next thing you know, he's living in Sodom. And maybe he's thinking, well, we'll be salt and light here in Sodom. But
so there's a remarkable little essay that C.S. Lewis is known for called The Inner Ring.
Yeah.
Gets into what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's the pool of these guys have credibility and respect, and every man wants that. I don't know any man that doesn't. I mean, perhaps there's somebody that just kind of has a depth of character, but certainly it's a temptation for every man that I know. And we have to crucify that, because as David said earlier, pastors have to have battle scars, and if a man doesn't have any battle scars, then it's going to be harder to trust him. It's like you can trust a man to a degree when he speaks abstractly and theoretically of what I might do in this or that situation. But Brother Tom here, this man's been in the fight. This man has fought battles. Brother Chris, he's fought battles. These men up here, by the way, it's like these are the men. It's like you have a grandfather of the Southern Baptists and a grandfather in the PCA. Men that have been around. They fought the battles. They have the battle scars. And they look like they're 39 years old, both of them.
There are critical moments when the temptation is presented to you. And often they're off camera. So I spent time at Harvard Divinity School, and I can remember the temptation. I was walking across Harvard Yard, literally Harvard Yard, with my one of my professors, the one that was probably closest to me. And he made a joke, and he looked at me. He wanted to see what I would do. I didn't laugh. I knew I was done that day.
Tom,
Little stuff like that. It's little stuff like that. I'm totally serious.
Can you identify any moments in your career, Tom, where you were tempted, where there were opportunities to compromise and you knew that was an opportunity and you chose not to? Not to necessarily pat yourself on the back, but it would be helpful, I think, to hear of how you face those temptations. You just been a stud your whole career.
No, I was probably too stupid to recognize any kind of opportunities like that, Yeah, I mean, there were, when we started Founders Ministries 42 years ago now, shortly after that, there were all kinds of pressures. In fact, the first conference we held, 1983, we held at Memphis, Tennessee. The president of my seminary got the flyers, which were basically just regular paper with typewriter stuff on it. It's really funny. But here's the schedule of this conference on the doctrines of grace in the SBC. Not sure if anybody'd show up. We didn't know how many were. We had 100, which we were blown away by. There's that many. And the president of Southwestern Seminary, Russell Dilday, got that flyer that had been circulating around campus. He called a high-level meeting with select faculty, and he passed it around, and he said, "What are we going to do about this?" So these are our students that are doing this. And by God's grace, one professor was there by the name of Curtis Vaughn. And Dr. Vaughn stood up and he said, "I resent this meeting. These are my students, and I'll not be a part of this." And he walked out. We don't know what happened after that in that meeting, but life was made difficult for a lot of the students that were involved in that. So, I don't know. I mean, I just kind of kept my head down and tried to do the best that I could do. And so I don't know that I was ever faced with significant temptations like that.
Praise God.
Each of you's been in ministry for, a decade plus. Michael, 20 years. You two men much longer. You look back, what's one, if you could go back in time and tell 25 or 30-year-old you, do this differently or be ready for this, what would that one thing be that you'd say?
I can go first. I would say a pastor friend of mine, Tim Bailey, you mentioned him in your talk. Watch the Gospel Blimp. Seriously, look it up on YouTube. It was the Babylon Bee before there was the Babylon Bee. That's great. But Pastor Tim Bailey told me once, he said, you have to learn to see what you see. And there are ways that my gut will tell me something. I'll have an instinct, but my instinct doesn't have data. It's like I can't prove that. I can't footnote what I'm seeing, but something seems off here. And I have learned to trust that. But I didn't trust it at first because it's like he didn't actually say whatever. It's like, but I knew. And if I could go back and speak to my earlier self, I'd be like, trust your gut. If you discern something, follow it. That doesn't mean you're suspicious needlessly of people. But if you see something, Russell Moore said something a little weird. Tim Keller said something like, that's a head scratcher. I trusted too easily, and the Lord I had to get burned by people I trusted too easily in order to develop the skill of discernment. So that's what I would do.
Can I get an answer from each of you? Or would you go back in time?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. James Boyce, late James Boyce, said that we tend to overestimate what God will do in 2 years and underestimate what he will do in 20. And taking a long look is always valuable. Those mountains turn into molehills, and it's just a good thing to do. I wish I had learned that earlier and stayed with it. The other thing would be to diligently guard your heart more than you think you ever would need. I mean, that's been the biggest battle in my ministry, without a doubt, is dealing with my own heart, guarding against bitterness, seeing pride in there that shouldn't be there, and just all kinds of things. And so that battle never changes. It doesn't get any easier. It hasn't yet. And I think I would have been better served had I been more sober-minded about that battle early on.
As I think back on the course of my life and ministry, I think that I put too much faith in my ability to plan early on, and sort of pull things off, and I didn't have enough faith in God's sovereign direction in my life. I'm at a place now that I could not even possibly imagine being when I started. So I've been doing this for 40 plus years, and if you'd asked me in the early days, will you be where I am now, I would have just laughed.
That's really helpful. Most of us in this room have kids and or grandkids who, those of us who are post-millennial are even still a little anxious about the future after listening to you, Chris. And
Are you a Dispy now, Wade?
I am not. But I see the appeal of being raptured out of such an AI world. So here's
That's the biggest selling point of the rapture, I think.
all right. The unsaved can deal with the machine.
I'm not a rapture guy. I am post-mill. Let me just stress that I am. And by the way, the people who founded that magazine that I mentioned, the Christian Century, were all post-mill.
Wow, of a different sort.
They were a different sort, but they had a way of kind of I don't know. I guess just underestimating just the length of time and the challenges and the ups and downs in history, and the fact that things can go tremendously wrong for a long time, and God's still sovereign.
Yeah. So if we've got our kids and we're grandkids and we're slightly anxious about the future, or we want to prepare them, what is one either book or story or biography that we should feed our kids or grandkids to help them to be courageous for the future? Is there a nonfiction book, a fiction book, a story from church history that you would recommend that we feed to our children and grandchildren to get them courageous for the future?
The Terminator movie, new one. Kidding.
I just think a knowledge of church history is just the thing to note. There are so many, there are so many who have been faithful under duress that we can talk about and draw inspiration from the early church, the Reformation, even in the world we live in now, around the world where there are Christians who are martyred. If I remember correctly, I think that the 20th century might go down as the bloodiest century in terms of martyrs.
I mean, you brought up Boniface a few years ago at County Before Country, and that was helpful.
Yeah, I was more or less told speak on Boniface, so I did. So I was happy to do it. I was happy to do it, but there are just remarkable figures in the history of the church that I think many of our people just aren't aware of.
Maybe I say amen to that. I mean, there's so many stories, but William Carey's stories are great stories. He said, I can plod, and he plodded, and one night he was awakened, and all of his life's work was burning to the ground in a warehouse. And so that next morning he started over with the translations that ultimately blessed that part of the world. But beyond that, what I would give to my children and grandchildren, and by God's grace, we were seeing some of this, is to love the church. Love the church. Don't ever be tempted by those who say, I love Jesus, but I can't stand the church. Love the church with all of her faults and all of her frailties. Get in the best church you can find and make it better. And do not forsake the church. That, I think, is as much that will be as helpful to you as anything no matter where you are, what the circumstances might tend to be, than anything else that I could ever do. So if I could give that to all my kids and grandkids, I'd die a happy man.
Pastor Tom, years ago, I watched By What Standard, and it blessed me. I was an SBC church planter, Bivo church planter, and I didn't know what was happening in the SBC. I watched that, and your courage was a great help to me. But I've listened to you since, and even just right now, hearing you say that, and I think I would be tempted to be bitter. You've been maligned. People assume the worst about your motives. Oh, here he comes to vote to abolish the ERLC again. And you're doing it all for love of the church, and then you sit here and you talk about loving the church. It's evident you do not bear ill will towards the SBC. How do we do that? How do we fight these fights and yet not hold grudges, not be angry, not get bitter?
Yeah, well, it is absolutely true that not one thing has been said about me that comes even close to how bad it really is in me. And so I know that, so I can kind of chuckle when people do their best, you just don't know. But it really is the cross. It's the cross of Jesus, because when I became a Christian, I said, and I agreed with, and I publicly had declared by God through the death of his son on the cross, that Tom Ascol is such a scoundrel that it took the death of God's son to save me. So what's somebody going to say about me? The cross testifies to the wickedness of my sin. Nobody can say anything comes close to how bad it really is. But also, on the cross, I'm justified. On the cross, I'm accepted by God. Every last one of my sins has been paid for. So this guy doesn't like me. He's not going to invite me into his club or what. The God of the universe loves me. Gave his son for me. I've been justified. There's not anything that anybody can do that can detract from the acceptance that I have before the Creator God who gave up his son for me. I mean, my goodness. On my worst day, I have more to rejoice about than Bill Gates does on his best day.
We can't end on a better note than that. Please give a round of applause for these men. And look, we're Calvinists, right? Michael asked me to end at 5:45, and that Pastor Tom finished that answer at like 5:45:00. I mean, man, God is sovereign.